Jody Lynn Nye is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author. She writes science fiction, she writes fantasy, she collaborates with the best in her genre. And contrary to what it says on our website, her words are in about 50 novels.
Wow.
And more than 200 short stories. I first heard about Jody at DragonCon, where we both go every year. This was last year in the Bain Books panel. I picked up a couple of anthologies. Do I have a book sitting over there?
Yes. Oh God.
Am I making you blush?
Oh, your notes went flying.
Been one of them days.
Okay. That should end the Three Stooges portion of our show. One of the books I picked up, Chicks in Tank Tops, which turned out to be even better than it sounds. Particularly her short story, A Girl and Her Tank, which I will get you to sign later. What I love about Jody's work is that there's a lot of action, but she knows how to make you smile. And trust me, it is not easy to work good humor into a strong, spacefaring military story or something like that. But she does it with style. That's her work. What I love about Jody Nye herself is that she is so generous with her talent. Despite her high-speed writing schedule, she has found time to speak on hundreds of panels about writing. She speaks at schools and libraries. She taught fantasy writing at Columbia College. And she runs this 2-day writer's workshop at the aforementioned DragonCon, which in and of itself would make it worth going. In between writing all these great stories, she has written some great books about how to write these great stories. I suspect we may hear more than a drop or two of wisdom in the next few minutes from her. But right now, it is a pleasure and a privilege for me to introduce one of the great ladies of speculative fiction, Jody Lynn Nye.
I want to thank my wonderful hosts, Austin and Denise, and Linda, and everybody, and Susan for making me so welcome this weekend and getting to know a lot of you, including the one survivor of my actual friends. Very happy to be here, and I hope that you are having a good time too. So, like many of you, I don't remember a time when I wasn't telling stories. And even before I could write them down, I was making up characters and sending them on fantastic adventures. So, and like many of you, I was drawing from the input I received from the world around me, including books, television, fairy tales, and the lore from both sides of my wild and creative family. I told them to my brothers and young cousins, and eventually my friends as well. I had a long-running series in demand by my cousins about a prince named Larry and his pet penguin that was funny and full of ridiculous magic, and maybe someday I'll write them down. I am lucky to be descended on one side from artists, engineers, scientists, a television producer, and a physicist who worked on the Apollo 11 project. And on the other side from musicians, band leaders, a costume maker and businesswoman, accountants, a film director who actually made a movie with Barbra Streisand, writers, including one famous one, and more about him later, all of whom were warm, encouraging presences during my childhood. So small wonder that no one thought it was weird that I wanted to make movies. or at least render my dreams and fantasies into something more concrete. I nagged my band leader grandfather into teaching me to write cursive, because before my friends had really mastered printing, because it looked much more interesting. It was almost like code. And even then, I was interested in things that could be hidden in plain sight. I started writing my stories into little books that I made out of my father's office paper, illustrating and stapling them. No one really remarked that it was weird that a 6-year-old was publishing her own books. Not with my background. They encouraged me to take chances, not dangerous ones. They didn't want me to get hurt, and I didn't want to get hurt. But chances that would lead me into wonderful discoveries. I had to look through microscopes and see the velvet on the wings of butterflies, and that went right into one of my stories. They introduced me to the Marx Brothers and Superman, and all sorts of things that were at once wholesome and perhaps a little subversive. But comic books, my maternal grandfather, who was a printer and an inventor, whose timing was just a little unfortunately off, he invented a blinking turn signal and got to the patent office just behind the guy who produced a similar one and obtained the patent. Introduced me to comic books. This probably would have been a much more elegant story with gold-plated car parts or something like that if he'd made it there on time, but that's open for speculation. So, thanks to Grandpa, I read Gold Key comics and classic comics, and yes, DC, and my universe expanded yet again. I absorbed it all, adding Talking Ducks, Ivanhoe, and Wonder Woman into my world. Before I was born, my mother worked for a man who had been the head of distribution for MGM Pictures in Chicago. Most people don't remember that there was an important branch of the film industry in the middle of the country. But it began before easy coast-to-coast flights, when travel was mostly by train or by bus. After Mom left to have me, Mr. Good, Charles Good, well named by the way, kind man who had been decent enough not to chase my very innocent mother around the desk, was snapped up by Buena Vista Pictures to go do the same job he had in Chicago. And he eventually moved to Anaheim, California to send Disney movies out to the distributors across the country. But Mr. Good never forgot us. He sent my mom, me, and my expanding collection of brothers distributors' tickets to see movies before they were released to the general public. They liked Pinocchio, Bad Nuts and Broomsticks, The Jungle Book, and many others. These movies filled my little imagination with color and ideas. And we also got things like libretti, soundtrack albums, stickers, books, and toys that reinforced our memories of what we had seen. Nothing makes a story stand out more in a child's mind, or an adult's for that matter, than seeing it presented on a screen 40 feet across. We absorb what we see, and it can change our mental picture of what we imagined when we read the book, if there had been a book, but more on that later. When I was 8, I started going to a sleepaway camp, a theater arts camp in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin, where my grandmother ran the costume shop for all the productions, and my uncle was the musical director. My audience for nighttime stories increased from brothers and cousins and friends to a cabin full of campers who no longer had access to televisions for an entire month, or 2 months, but they had me. And I attended this camp on and off until I was 16 and a junior counselor, taking acting, singing, and dancing lessons during the daytime and telling stories in the dark of night. The darkness concealed my sight of my fellow campers, so my native shyness wouldn't stop me from being put off by the disapproving expressions of some of the other girls. They liked the stories, or they would have shouted for the counselors asleep in the next room to come in and make me shut up so they could all go to sleep. The voice of Morgan Freeman would have erupted by now about the wholesome background flute music to say something about it being pretty obvious that our protagonist was going to become a writer or something. Now you might say, what about those acting lessons? How did those add to the development of a potential writer? Pretty well, actually. Once you were taught to inhabit or try to inhabit the persona of a character, you had to step outside yourself to be somebody else for a little while. most of my fellow campers acted as characters who sounded and acted exactly as themselves would have done, which is hilarious when you contemplate the notion of a 10-year-old Sky Masterson trying to seduce an equally 10-year-old Sergeant Sarah Brown. With his confession about how the wee hours of New York were his favorite time of day, as if his parents were going to let him out at that hour. But others, we got it. And some of us rose to the occasion and became the best damn 10-year-old Sky Mastersons or Sergeant Sarah Browns or Nicely Johnsons you could imagine. But wait, record skid, didn't you say you were a shy kid? Yes, and I still am, but I discovered something else at that theater camp. Once I was persuaded to go out on that stage, a challenge for me, I loved it. I am a great big ham. Unlike a large number of my fellow campers, I don't get stage fright. I have never had stage fright in my life. I may have performance anxiety, as many of you might, as in, I don't want to let myself or the audience down. But once I have those footlights in between me and my listeners, I can do anything on the stage, or behind a microphone, or teaching on the other side of a table. And that separation has been enormously freeing. It gave me perspective to keep from being overwhelmed. Richard Bach, in his second best-known book, Illusions, the first being Jonathan Livingston Seagull, said, perspective, use it or lose it. I liked learning about people as long as I wasn't in the middle of a human scrimmage. I liked seeing how they react to situations. Again, it was like espionage. I knew things about them that I bet they didn't know about themselves. Being a remote observer took me away from my own situation, which for many sensitive kids wasn't all that great. I got bullied a lot. I had very few real friends. Literature in particular was my one great escape. I read a lot. Nothing's changed about that. My nose was always in a book. My mother brought me to the library whenever I ran out of things to read. And I would take out as many books as the system would allow me to. On the other hand, I wasn't that great about getting the books back to the library on time. You are looking at the Morton Grove Library, #1 most wanted criminal. I didn't quite have a wanted poster up in the librarian's lounge, but I might as well have had. Why? I probably couldn't bear to let my favorites go back on the shelves. Books were my friends. The library was one of my primary sources, as I didn't have a lot of spending money. And the other source, not as erudite, was the small local store, a bodega of some sort, a corner store called Convenient. Although the owners kept trying to shoo us kids out of it, they had a large magazine rack down one of the aisles, far enough back that they couldn't see us well from the cash register. They sold comic books, and at the time they were, how old am I? 12 cents each. And with that, they also sold 3 comic books sealed in plastic bags for 25 cents.
Wow.
The ones with the titles of the comics cut away, which meant that those had been returned to the publisher for credit. So we were reading pirated copies that should have been pulped. My first interaction with illegal sales, and not my last. Thanks to reading and watching movies and television, I was quickly figuring out what kind of stories appealed to me. I used to read absolutely everything that came into my hands. I liked a happy ending more than a sad or indeterminate one. I don't like horror. I read a lot of horror stories in comics, military stories, and watched scary movies, but stopped after a while, realizing that 1, I didn't like them, and 2, I could stop absorbing media that didn't appeal to me. I was becoming a choosier customer. And that was an important step for me. I dared to reject that which did not deserve my time. The book usually was better than the movie. I like funny more than serious, but I did stick with stories that I instinctively decided were well written and that had characters I could relate to, female or not, human or not. A lot of children's books were forgettable, simply not that good. I've also never been a huge fan of romances or stories set in the time in which I lived. After all, I was already here, and that wasn't so great. So why consume more of the same? The very last ordinary story I ever read was a Scholastic Book Services novel. Remember those?
Yes.
Which I bought probably for about 15 cents, called Freckled and 14. It was about a girl in her first year of high school who was bullied and had to learn to be herself. It bored me to death. Why? It contained no real revelations, no interesting world building, and no surprise ending. I went back to what I had been doing for years, reading everything in the school or the Morton Grove Public Library, indiscriminately, until I'm pretty sure I read everything in both places. I liked biographies, especially about fascinating people like Dr. George Washington Carver. What I disliked about bios was that everyone always died in the end. I love books of mythology and legend and stories set in foreign places, other times, or on other planets. So, many years later, I had the pleasure of hearing a fellow science fiction writer, Lois McMaster Bujold, an intensely talented science fiction and fantasy writer whose books I really enjoy, speaking at an American Library Association meeting. And she was quoting from a study that said there were, generally speaking, two kinds of readers. Type A readers read stories that were about realistic people in this world in situations that could potentially happen to them. Type readers read everything but. And type B readers actually read 6 to 7 times the number of books that type A readers do. So that meant that genre fiction readers consume far more literature than anyone who only reads plain white-covered Harlequin romances. Now, this is not to cast shade on Harlequin readers. At least they are reading books. That's very important. But that kind never really appealed to me. I am an unashamed type B reader. I love fantasy, mysteries, thrillers, but I was nearly lost to science fiction thanks to teachers who had my best interests in mind, but didn't take into account my sensitive nature. I spent almost all of my free time in high school at the student radio station. I was a 14-year-old newscaster. Our high school station, WMTH, has been an over-the-air broadcast station since 1959 and has a number of notable alumni, including the current Svengoolie. I auditioned to be on air talent at my first week at Maine East and was allowed to join the news department, overseen by a senior who went on to have a long career as news director at a television station in St. Louis, Missouri. From him, we newscasters learned to rip UPI and AP content off our, yes, we had 2 teletypes in the station. Rewrite and rehearse them so that we could read them without hesitating or saying or ah, and pronounce these sometimes difficult names. 4 seconds a line. I also did 2 music shows a week, and when I wasn't in the station, I used to hang out in the faculty office at the speech and drama department, as I got along with teachers better than with most of the students. We were talking one day about books, and I asked them, what is this thing called science fiction? So they recommended their favorite books, and the debate teacher, a very nice man, lent me a few of the ones he thought I might like. I read them. I hated them. Most of them were dystopias written during the Cold War in the 1950s, and almost all by Kurt Vonnegut or Ray Bradbury. Most of them ended with the world blowing up. Now, I live here, so I was terrified about the prospect of having the world blow up around me, because where would I go? So, during my early years of grade school, some of you are old enough to probably have experienced this as well. We did the duck and cover exercise, where they called us into the hallway and made us put our heads between our knees. And the admin finally figured out that that would do nothing in the event of an actual nuclear strike, except distract us until the bombs went off, and then it wasn't the school district's problem anymore. So I said I would never read science fiction again. So we had a 3-floor library at Maine East. They were connected by staircases towards the back, and you could walk up the stairs in front of the LRC. It was called Learning Resource Center. I went to my high school reunion 2 weeks ago. The library has been reduced to 5 triple wide shelves in an open plan area. I have more books than they do. Now mind you, many of their books, and in fact all of their textbooks are online now. They're all connected by tablets. So kids don't understand the pleasure of reading a book for fun. Everything is in a tablet in the palm of their hand. I used to wander the shelves reading mysteries, bios, mythology, history, and fantasy. Anything except science fiction. And then I came across a book entitled The Crystal Griffin by Andre Norton. I read it and loved it, right up until the end, which, spoiler alert, revealed that it was not only science fiction, but it was a dystopian scenario. The difference was that humankind survived, and although they were blown back almost to the Middle Ages without advanced technology, I stopped saying no to science fiction. Norton became my safe place. She wrote so many books, over 130 of them. So I always had something that I could go back to and read when I had tiptoed out and tried something from an author that I was not familiar with, such as Ursula K. Le Guin, Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, so many other mind-blowing writers. And I discovered how they created worlds that beat the hell out of Freckled and 14 and scratched the itch I couldn't reach before. As an aside, years later I got to tell Andre Norton herself what her books meant to me and to thank her. I'm glad I did. They say you should never meet your heroes, but I really disagree. All this time I'm still writing my little stories and reporter's notebooks, which appeal to me for some reason. I still like one skinny kind. And on graph paper, which I had an immense supply from years of science and math classes that never got used up from year to year. When I filled a notebook, I tucked it into a corner of my room or tossed it in the back seat of my Volkswagen Beetle. My best friend always said she could find something good to read there, for which I will always love her. Apart from my mother, she was my first reader. I didn't show my work to anybody, mainly because I never thought of publishing it. Why, you may ask? Would you believe that it never occurred to me that I could write a book? For some reason, I had a mental block that books came from somewhere, from someone. Why not me? I don't know. It just never occurred to me. This is especially funny in light of the notable relative whom I mentioned earlier. My first cousin twice removed is Sidney Sheldon. Oh. Yeah, that's Sidney Sheldon. Oscar winner, writer, producer, director, actor. He was my paternal grandfather's first cousin. So, no, I never met him. My mother sent him my first two books, which were Choose Your Own Adventures. And he sent back a very nice note, but what could he say? I wish her well in her career, which is what he did say, and I think it was the kindest thing he could have done. So, I would have loved to meet him and ask him questions, how he came up with I Dream of Jeannie, or any of the other many projects that he had over his long life, writing a dozen best-selling novels, and because he was already in our family, I don't know why I didn't think of writing a book. I wanted to direct movies, go figure. I went to college. When I was 9 years old, I saw my first episode of Star Trek, the original series. I was hooked. Not only was it TV made for type B readers, but it assumed a future in which humankind survived and was traveling to the stars, meeting alien races, and not blowing them up or being killed by them. It was the hopeful future that I wished for. I started buying the novelizations of the episodes by SF author James Blish, the very few original novels that existed at the time, and the nonfiction books about the making of the series. One of them was called The Trouble with Tribbles by David Gerrold. In it, he said that he had gone to the University of Southern California, into their cinema department. At the age of 19, he cadged his way onto the Star Trek set and ended up writing their most popular episode. Well, if he could do it, why not me? So, in the most daring act that I had ever attempted, I applied to USC, got in, declared a cinema major, and set out to meet my future. Toward the end of the second semester, I was invited by a friend to stay on for the summer and work as a production assistant on a student film he was making. I had to turn him down because I wouldn't be paid, you see. There's a lot of volunteering that goes into student films. And I couldn't afford Southern California without an income. If I had stayed, my life would have been a great deal different than the one you see me living right now. Circumstances sent me back to a college in Chicago, where I did meet my future. But now I was aware that people, maybe even ones like me, wrote books and stories, and magazines that I read accepted submissions of stories that would be paid for and printed. So I wrote a story and I sent it to Analog into the hands of Stanley Schmidt, the magazine's longtime editor. He rejected it, but not in an offhand way. No, he sent me a very, very nice letter saying that he had seen the plot before, but he really liked my style and asked me to send something else. I never did. I chickened out. I was too afraid to be rejected again. I did not recognize that I had been handed a rare opportunity. Most rejections, especially from magazines, as many of you may know, are form letters. Plain, polite, but to the point letters. I had no idea and no one to ask that a personalized letter, especially with encouragement wanting more, was rarer than hen's teeth and a hell of a lot more appealing. I have since gotten to know Stan. He's a very nice man. I finally told him the story I just told you, and he pointed a finger at my face and said, "Chide, chide, chide. If I told you I wanted another story, I meant it." So please, if you take anything away from my talk today, take this. Do not waste opportunities. Please do not emulate me. I've been growing into the would-be humorous science fiction writer I was always meant to be, and when the chance came to publish my kind of story came along, I turned it away. I don't think any of you would make such an obvious blunder, but it didn't seem obvious to me at the time. It's great to look back in hindsight and say, oh yeah, you should have done that. It might seem like the safe bet to say no because you're afraid of failing. So what? So if you fail, you at least tried. And that is an important lesson that I had to learn. It's an important one for my development. Since then, I have tried hard to take advantage of things that look difficult or impossible to the moment, at the moment that they were proposed. Remember that I said I was a cinema major? With a couple of partners, I tried writing scripts that we brought to a Chicago-based producer. He turned all of them down, but I kept trying until the partnership broke up. In my second year of college at that Chicago University, my entire future presented itself in a party on one night. I'll bore you with all the details some other time, but because I was there, I started playing Dungeons & Dragons, a game that has been a great joy to me, not to mention a wellspring of friends and a source of income. Not only that, but I made connections at the party that eventually put me in contact with a woman who would become one of my best friends, and who would eventually introduce me to the man I was going to marry, who, coincidentally, owned a company that created modules suitable for playing with advanced Dungeons and Dragons. He had also worked directly with TSR, the creators of D&D, writing supplemental material for the first 45 issues of their Dragon magazine. Bill is a force of nature. Anybody who knows him, yes, I see Waylon nodding, absolutely true. He pursued me, and I wasn't sure that this energetic, outgoing, kind-hearted man was for me, but I took the leap of faith. And it's been so good ever since, really. He's loving and kind and funny and intelligent and figures things out. He understands systems. But he has pushed me to achieve goals going higher and wider than I thought possible. Among his many titles, Bill is a book packager. That means he puts together hundreds of projects for publishing houses, hiring authors and possibly artists or illustrators, chivying them and nurturing them until a finished manuscript can be handed to the editor who commissioned it. It's a job publishers would do themselves if they had infinite staff, but Bill is a host in himself. I've been part of some of these packages, starting with one that depended on my knowledge of role-play gaming, which opened up all kinds of doors for me, and we still do play D&D together. A colleague of mine, the brilliant Diane Duane, was, among other things, she was writing fantasies and science fiction, but at the time she was story editor on Dinosaurs, a Saturday morning cartoon. Anybody remember Dinosaurs? Very, very cute. And she sent out a frantic alarm to writer friends on a Friday. She needed, I think, 8 scripts by Monday. So she called everybody she knew who was capable of writing a script. And each of us had 3 days to write a 22-minute animation script, bearing in mind the host of rules that we had to obey. I was scared that I would make a mess of it and let her down, but I did it. And it was produced, and I'm still proud of that. Fast forward a few years until I had published a number of books and many, many more short stories. The opportunity arose to write the script for a D&D movie. I was apprehensive, certain I didn't have enough experience to do it well, so I called Diane and asked if she would write it with me, and I could learn from her as I went. She said yes. Alas, we did not get to do it, but I had taken my courage in both hands and said yes to an opportunity that would have had me shutting down in fear only a few years before. I was learning. It still made me quake, but I said yes, certain I could figure out a way to accomplish what I was being asked to do. Since then, I've published a lot more books and short stories in my field. I'm proud of my skills and my reputation, but I've taken on other projects to which I would have said no right away. Wrote materials for that very role-play game that has consumed a lot of my life, check. Wrote Choose Your Own Adventures, check. Wrote Choose Your Own Adventures in the style of the writers whose worlds that we were licensing for the project, checks times 4. Wrote a science fiction romance story, never thought I'd write a romance of any kind, check. Wrote a Xena warrior princess story, check. Yeah, if Keith DeCandido was here, he'd be chuckling with his 40-odd media tie-in universes. Check. Oh, yes, added 3 of my own anthologies, check. Wrote 2 graphic novel scripts, check. And check. Those were done under the aegis of a very nice man who gently guided me through the process and explaining why comic scripts are done in a certain way. Something that I really never analyzed in my many decades of reading comic books. I teach an intensive writer's workshop, check, 15 years now. Teach a college course in fantasy writing, check, and oh my God, I didn't get any of my own work done during that entire year. I've learned something every single time that I have stepped out of my comfort zone, and I am all the better for it. Looking back, would I have done more things than I did? Pretty much all but one. That door closed. But other doors would have opened, and they did. So please let me say that you should never say no to an opportunity to try something you have never done before, unless it will injure or kill you or someone else. The Moscow rule of shopping applies to experiences too. Are you familiar with the Moscow rule of shopping?
No.
Buy it when you see it, because you will never see it again. Take every opportunity offered, whether you know how to do it now or not. Ask for help if you have to. Don't let your everyday self stop you from doing something new out of fear. Fear has prevented countless other people from publishing stories and books. And what would you say to them? You'd say go for it. And so do I. Make your life richer with new conquests. You'll be even more proud of yourself than you are right now.